Hello everyone and welcome to a special edition of Streamtime Sports. I'm your host Nick Meacham and thrilled to be joined by Minal Modha from Ampere Analysis and Steve McCaskill from SportsPro. So guys, we have some interesting stuff to talk about today. Big announcements just hit the SportsPro news channel. So we need to talk about that because it could have some pretty major ramifications for the industry. So firstly, welcome Minal. Good to see you. I think you've been on the podcast perhaps once before, a couple of appearances on the SportsPro podcast, but great to have you with us again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is going to be really exciting.
And Steve, good to have you back once again. I know this will be going out pretty soon, so I think you're on last week's podcast. So it seems like you're becoming a even more regular than before, given Chris is away at the moment. Great to have you back again, Steve. We're going to start with you. Firstly, why are we here? What are we talking about? What's this big deal that's setting the whole industry into a bit of crazy banter at the moment?
Well, it does feel like, as again, last time I was talking about gaming, this time we're talking about wrestling, which do feel like two emergency SportsPro things to break glass in case of wrestling deal. But basically, we're talking about this deal between WWE and Netflix. It's $5 billion over 10 years, and there's two key components there. One is that WWE Raw, which is one of WWE's two main television shows, is going to be exclusive to Netflix globally from January 2025. That includes the US, which means that for the first time ever, Raw will not be available on linear television. It's quite a big step. And the second component is the global element of that, which means in pretty much every country apart from the US, all of WWE's programming is going to be on Netflix. That includes Raw, SmackDown, and its premium live events, including Wrestlemania, and that impacts the UK and I think other territories can be added as and when. So it's a pretty significant deal in a lot of areas. It's big for WWE, it's big for Netflix, it's big for the US, it's big globally. There's a lot of narratives at play here.
I mean, it's bucked about every media rights trend we've seen in the entire industry. I mean, I've been one that's been vocal about, I don't understand why Netflix would need to jump into the live sports game, continuing their monopoly really of households across the world and indeed markets like the US. But Minal, what's your take? When you heard the announcement, what was your initial reaction to it?
Honestly, I was really surprised by it. I wrote a column for you guys last year to say why Netflix won't be buying any rights anytime soon, and they've managed to prove me wrong very quickly. But I think that some of that still stands because this deal is quite different. WWE is a scripted sport and entertainment property. So it kind of still fits into what Netflix is doing in terms of its wider content offering. The scripted element falls into all the other TV shows and the movies that they have. And then they have a lot of sport documentaries. So it does lean into that quite a lot. So I still think they might not necessarily be going for the traditional live rights anytime soon, but this kind of feels like it could be a really perfect fit.
It seems that Netflix keep sort of flirting and skirting around the edges of sports and live sports. I mean, this is about as close as they've been. They've done a number of live sports initiatives that aren't the traditional. But what do you think's the reason they've made this move? Is it because they've now just conceded, or they've just realized that they want to keep growing? They have to invest into live streaming space, even if it's let's call it live sports and entertainment space, or is there something else at play here?
I mean, I can take that one first. I think there's a need for diversification. Like the global subscription OTT streaming market, there is still growth, but within the US, there's very much stagnation. So they really do need to diversify their offering a little bit. But also what I think would be really attractive with WWE is twofold. You have lots of secondary content that comes with it. So there's lots of original series, there's lots of documentaries, but then also there are a few different monetization opportunities for Netflix. So you have all these massive events that are currently on pay-per-view. Does Netflix go down a pay-per-view route, in which case it's a new revenue stream? Do they show it, but with advertising, in which case huge advertising revenue potential there? Or do they use it on their own platform, give it to subscribers for free, mitigate against churn, and then maybe attract some new subscribers when those events are on? So I think it's twofold, that monetization route and then also lots more content added to their library.
So looking through some of the specifics on the deal, from what I've read and heard, that there's actually it's announced as a 10-year deal, but there is a 5-year get out for Netflix, but with also the ambition that they could extend it for a further 10 years if that is that everyone's happy with how it's all projecting, the Raw component is only US focused, whereas in the international markets, it's the whole playbook, I suppose, of WWE's content. Steve, one of the things we've talked about when we've had you on before as well, talking WWE, is about that audience base. Just do you think that that's one of the reasons they made this move, that to tap into the loyalty that WWE fans have? Is that something that you think they really needed to bring to the platform?
WWE's fan base is extremely loyal. They will move where the product goes. I mean, Raw was on USA Network for many years. It's been on Spike. It's been on a few other places. SmackDown has moved from channel to channel, and it's always sort of maintained that audience, even going to Fox. It behaves like a sports property in some ways. For all intents and purposes, it broadcasts like a sports property. It deals with broadcasters in the same way. But the other thing is, as I think Minal was saying, a lot of people don't consume it live. They consume it like a TV series, almost like a serial as well. It doesn't. There is a live component, and then there is an on-demand component, or people who record it. And I think the reason why they've gone for it in this way, I mean, it's a little bit similar to what's happened to the WWE Network in the US with Peacock. It's being consumed, and I think they've just decided that it fits in with their overall strategy of, again, as you say, diversification, getting more fans on there as possible, and the wrestling fans they'll move there, so you get that initial base, and then Netflix has this ability to make hits as well. So I did think they'd eventually move into sport. I didn't quite see this happening. I also didn't see a lot of the other moves they've been linked with actually happening, because I thought they were too expensive, or it wasn't really quite a good fit. But one thing WWE's always been good at is embracing new technologies. It's been really quite proactive with social. The WWE Network itself was a really progressive idea. And I was chatting in the office today, and I was thinking, in a weird way, WWE and Netflix are two of the companies that made streaming work for them and really advanced their business. Had not got caught up in other areas. So you've got that initial fan base that will follow. They'll go wherever it goes. It's probably a good deal for them, especially if it's in the US, it's going to Netflix, although you will need cable because SmackDown is still going to be on cable. But then elsewhere, it's what, let's use $9.99 as the figure. I know it can go up or down depending on adverts or how many devices you want. But that's a really compelling proposition for wrestling fans. That's £10 a month to get everything. You don't have to subscribe to like in the UK TNT. And WB, I guarantee you, in the lead up to Wrestlemania, the first Wrestlemania on Netflix, it's going to be on the front page of the Netflix page. It's going to draw people in, lapsed fans. Peacock has seen ratings go up. WWE has seen ratings go up since on Peacock for its major events. So again, I think it's twofold. You have that loyal fan base that will go wherever the product goes, and then you have that ability to bring new fan base, use the reach of the Netflix platform, and perhaps convert more of those. That's either lapsed fans or new fans that might have seen WWE content on TikTok or Instagram, become long-term subscribers and sticky subscribers for Netflix. And then the next time they go for the negotiating table, it could be even greater than the sums being talked about this time.
I mean, the couple of interesting parts to this really are, the fact that this is basically near on 52 weeks a year. Is that right, Steve? The Raw show. So they're not committing to even like an NFL or an NBA that has that seasonality here. They're committing to an event that is all year round. And I think that's pretty unique. It's basically doesn't happen in the sports space, right? You have the seasonality that always plays a role. That seems to be, I think, pretty significant to show that there's a commitment here that, hey, we're going all in now on live streaming. Is there any part of your feeling now that this is going to be just a test case and they're going to wait and see? Or do you think the script's now flipped and they're now going to be all in on the sports space? Because it feels like this is something that, for me, just can't be something you make a move on unless you're going to keep spending.
I think this is going to be a test case for them, in all honesty, because with everything that happened with Love is Blind last year, it was a bit of a PR disaster for Netflix, in all honesty. And they're probably going to need to spend the next year really making that streaming tech robust. I was actually mining through loads of articles yesterday to try and figure out if every weekly show is actually going to be shown live, or if they're going to pre-record it and put it on Netflix, which will obviously put way less of a burden on Netflix. And then maybe it's just the 4 big live events every single year, in which case it would just make their life a lot easier. I do think it will open the door a little bit for other properties, but if I was a traditional sports property, I personally wouldn't be getting too excited. If I was someone like the UFC, I'd be getting a little bit more excited about this, because you want it's that mix of sport and entertainment. If you fit into that bracket, I think you could partner with Netflix quite easily. Maybe something that's a bit more traditional, I think it might be a bit harder.
Steve, what's your take?
I don't think they're going to be pre-recording any of this. They have pre-recorded shows in the past. So SmackDown used to be filmed on a Tuesday night and broadcast on a Friday night. Doesn't really work with WWE and the social strategy, I think, because they, in the social media age, spoilers, they like to be trending, and of course you can filter that out, and you can only release your own content as that's being broadcast as live. I think, as you say, they're going to have to spend the next year making sure that tech stack is robust enough to handle this, because that's one thing that's always one thing everyone's worried about when you take something off linear and put it on digital. Is it robust? Is it going to squander the goodwill from fans? So I think it will be live, but I think they're definitely going to have to make sure that it can support it. As for other properties, I still think Netflix can be selective. I'm still not going to believe, or every time I'm briefed, that Netflix is interested in X property, which I think lots of people like to do. I mean, if I believed all that, I'd expect to see ATP and WTA tennis and Apple TV. It's just people trying to drum it all up. But I think they're going to, UFC. Yeah, I can see that. I can see influencer led events going on there, and perhaps something that Netflix would like to build up. It might take an undervalued property or take an ownership stake. I think that's much more likely. I'm not saying it's going to go for some like the X Games itself, but I could see something like the X Games. That's something I think would be a fit for Netflix. So I don't think it will stop, but I don't think it's going to be the free fall that people are expecting or would like to see happen.
I actually think if you're saying that you think that they will be going out live, the fact that they've only selected about 5 markets to begin with might be a bit of a strategy there, because you're not going fully global on the first day. You are at least limiting the audience that is going to be streaming it. So that actually might be a really tactical move on their side.
That's actually a really good point. Also, again, the time difference as well means that if you focus on getting the US right, you may not have to worry too much about elsewhere, because they'll watch it on demand. And as you say, limited markets to begin with. Yeah, absolutely.
It's going to be interesting to see how they do tackle the tech stack issue that you mentioned, because clearly they've had some issues with Love is Blind and the like, and the other broadcast efforts they've made around live sports to date haven't gone flawlessly yet. That's for sure. So, but one thing's for sure, they definitely have the resources, and there's plenty of great companies out there that can help them deliver it if they're going to make the full-blown commitment to it. And given they've given themselves 12 months from this announcement, I feel they've got the runway to get there and work it all out. My view is a little bit contrarian, as I think this has to be the beginning point for them to start investing more and more. I mean, the only thing that would stop them is the complexity around, so this is obviously my view, but the view around how most of the rights deals from any top property is done market by market. And that makes it obviously complex when there's such a global property. They won't want to be, I wouldn't imagine yet, going down the rabbit holes of doing country by country deals with some of these sports properties that will want the global ones. I think about what Apple and the MLS have done.
Yeah, they're not going to want the country by country ones, but there's a finite number of ones that are going to be sold on a regional or a global basis. I feel like DAZN's got women's football wrapped up, or that's what they're trying really hard to do. So to your point, they might have to look at some of that lower hanging fruit or some of those emerging sports where they might be a little bit more open to different distribution methods.
Yeah, I think that any property that can at least try and sync its global rights cycles together, they're more likely to be targeted by Netflix than something that's a bit more piecemeal, a bit more fragmented. The other thing I think is slightly related is, and Nick referred to MLS and Apple, is how important it is that WWE produces all of its own content. So Netflix doesn't it might have to get involved in the distribution side of the technology, but it doesn't need to get involved on the production side, because WWE does it all in-house already. Netflix doesn't have to make those investments. It is essentially paying the rights fee for the content and trying to improve its own infrastructure. So, and you've seen that again, MLS, that's taken on production responsibilities. It was able to sync its global calendar. So even if it is the start of something else, I don't think it's going to get too bogged down in the the market specifics of different markets getting bogged down in the specifics of each market. But there's very few properties of that size that are global and have that they've synced their cycles for it to go for. So yeah, I'm not really sure who would be the next logical target.
I was actually going to make a point, like in the grand scheme of things, when this comes, if you think about Netflix's content spend, right? So we forecast at Ampere that they're going to spend, I think it's like over $15 billion this year on TV and movies. So when we talk about this WWE deal in that context of 500 million a year, actually it's a really nice like testing ground that isn't going to break the bank for Netflix. And if they're then not having to invest in the production, they're investing in the tech, yes, and they're investing in the marketing aspect of it. It's a bit of a safer option for them. Like this is why I think this isn't them going fully in on sports, because when you really put that number into context, it's still a very, very tiny proportion of what they are spending on TV and movie content. I think it will grow, but possibly at a far slower pace, and it all depends on the returns on investment that they're going to get with it. But I do think that bit of context is quite important when analysing the deal.
Yeah, I think when Apple made that MLS deal, it was described as a rounding error or a marketing investment for Apple TV. It was 2 billion, 2.5 billion. I can't remember off the top of my head the MLS deal, but yeah, Netflix 5 billion. It's Netflix doesn't generate as much cash as Apple, and it's a bit more of a larger investment, but. Absolutely. In the grand scheme of things, when you think how much prestige drama costs, you think how much these things are getting expensive. It's not that big a sum in the grand scheme of things. And yeah, although you could argue it doesn't have as long a tail, it's still worthwhile investment.
So let's speculate a little bit, shall we? Who do you think, if they are going to start spending on live sports, who would be the next logical partner for them? Who's the one that is on their lips? Is it an NBA? Is it an F1? Is it someone else that we haven't talked about yet? Who do you think is the one that they should be going after next?
I mean, I would say someone like the UFC. WWE and UFC have already had the merger with IMG. It seems to be the logical next step. There is that sport and entertainment mix. There isn't that scripted element. So that would actually move them slightly further into live sport. But for me, that's where I would see it kind of going.
I feel like this should be saved for one of our annual prediction sessions where we make bold, slightly outlandish ones. So I'm not sure how much I actually believe this, but if we're looking at how this deal is structured from a US versus international point of view, let's take the NBA, for example. Let's say Netflix gets one of the national rights packages in the US and then gets the international rights to League Pass in the same way that DAZN has with Game Pass. I don't think it can strike a global deal in the same way, just because I think the NBA rights can be too valuable in certain international markets. You look at the break of that domestic versus international broadcast revenue. I think it's probably too high for them to go for. But I think League Pass is doable, and I think maybe one national slot. So yeah, not sure how serious I'm being, but that would be perhaps if they developed a blueprint, that would be how they follow up with it.
So Steve, what about someone like Formula One? Obviously they have a lot of rights deals in a lot of different markets. They have a pretty solid OTT offering. Do you think someone like F1, and obviously the relationship they've had with and the success of Drive to Survive, is someone they should be looking at seriously as a possible partner?
I think a step or two away, in all honesty. The amount of money Formula One generates globally is huge. So Netflix would have to come to the table with an absolutely enormous offer. And then there are risks for Formula One as well. Yes, you get this global exposure through a platform like Netflix. But from a really practical perspective, if you don't have sales teams out there selling your broadcast rights on a regular basis, you lose some of those relationships within those broadcasters. So then if you're putting all your eggs in one basket and Netflix decides to pull out, who are you going to? You have to kind of start from scratch and build those relationships up, and to then go from a global partner to multi-market partners again. That's going to be a really, really difficult thing to do. So I think you'd have to have some precautions in place, that Netflix would have to give you a lot of notice before they cancel the deal, like WWE have done. But I think that's one or two steps too far right now.
I think the other thing with that is the US still, it's not F1's main broadcast market. I think that's to use some examples we've given now, the US is the primary market and the rest are supplementary. I also think that Netflix has vast reach, but I think for all the audience gains made by Drive to Survive, there's still a large part of its audience that probably the linear television is the best way to reach them. And then there's there's regulatory issues, I think, there for some races need to be on free to air TV. How do you make that work? And then I think finally, again, just use the F1 as an example. Will the sponsors get the same amount of exposure that they might want across all those different demographics? I think F1's probably a little bit more complicated. It sort of makes sense and it sort of doesn't. It's in that weird territory in between.
One thing I want to talk about is actually Netflix approach around ad-supported subscriptions. I looked at their stats from their earnings call. About 23% of their subs are now ad-supported overall, and about 40% of the new subs coming in are ad-supported. So ad-supported subscriptions is becoming a huge part of their business. Minal, what's your take on the fact that Netflix has made this move and it seems to be going so well?
No, I think it's a really good one, and it fits the wider economic landscape in so many countries at the moment. We were getting to a point where there is so much fragmentation in the OTT space that people were account sharing left, right, and center. People were pirating content, and people getting rid of things that they're just not using by bringing in a slightly cheaper tier, and actually testing this idea that millennials, Gen Zs, Gen Alpha don't want to watch advertising, really testing that, it has really paid off for them. And when it comes to live sport, if you think of a lot of the traditional broadcasters, so much of the money that they make is around advertising. So it does give them another string to their bow that if they do go down and buy more sports, they have this other thing. They're not just going to be relying on subscription-based revenue. They have advertising there as well. I would be surprised if they didn't start rolling it out to some of their other markets. If it's been that successful, especially in the US and the UK. I think we'll be seeing it in so many of the other ones as well. And also just on that, because they are cracking down on account sharing, they are giving people at least a cheaper alternative option rather than them churning completely. At least they're saying, look, there's an entry level one that if you do still want to have access, you can do. So it's actually a really, really clever move from them.
And Steve, what's your thoughts as to whether a fully ad funded model can actually work? It should perhaps, with this investment into live sport, maybe look at a fully ad-funded model where there is no subscription and no barrier to entry, no paywall. Should it be something they should consider bringing into play to perhaps tap into those lower tier fans or what linear audiences that perhaps was generating in the past?
I think it would really depend on how the ad product performs for their advertisers. I don't know if I really see that happening if they go down the fast route. I think the only way that could happen is if they did get more heavily involved in sports, and as part of those negotiations, they agreed to open up certain content and they decided to monetize it themselves. I think Netflix, what they've done so far has worked quite well for them. They're doing well. We've seen the latest financials. Subscriber numbers are up. These ad-supported price plans are having a design impact. The cut down on password sharing is having a noticeable impact. I think it's something like 30 million new users in the last year or something, 13 million in the last quarter. I don't think they need to do fast or go down that route. Netflix appears to be making a success of streaming, and the ones that it's basically, I'm trying to think of a better term of this, spooked into trying to do streaming aren't faring as well with the investments in content. And I think they've managed to get most of the things right so far since they went into this space. I don't think they'll do fast unless they really, really have to, or they think it makes sense, and that might be the next time they need to increase subscriber numbers. But at the minute, they don't need to. They're seeing growth.
So what do you think is the likelihood of us seeing more deals play out in live sports? No doubt the whole industry is getting very excited about the fact that Netflix is here, including me. But do you think there's more deals to come imminently?
I would be really surprised, famous last words, if they sign any more deals this year. Because if I was someone at Netflix, I would use the first couple of years of WWE to see not only how it performs from a tech perspective, but what it does for profitability and for revenues. And if they find that sport is an avenue that works for them, at that point, you'd be like, right, we want to go all in, or we want to go bigger on this. But right now, they don't really have that proof of concept when it comes to live sport. This is very much the dipping the toes in. So if I was somebody, especially in their finance team, I'd want some proof before I'd be writing more checks for them.
Now, this deal has only come along a few months after the launch of TKO, the acquisition and merger between UFC and WWE. Do you think, Steve, it's possible that this deal might have been already on the table when Endeavour came in for WWE? I'm taken back to the story that Bernie Ecclestone, obviously who founded Formula One, was well known for playing off both sides, both the teams and the manufacturers and the FIA, in telling them, both respective parties, that there was a deal to be done. Both sides wanted to do a deal, yet they weren't really on playing the same hymn sheet. In fact, neither side was really ready to do a deal, and that sort of bridgemanship or gamesmanship was a way of him to bridge that gap and ultimately get F1 off the ground. I don't know. I just feel like, do you think maybe Ari Emanuel or Mark Shapiro may have done something similar, or has it all happened so fast in just a couple of months' time?
I'm really not sure on how long this has been in the works for. I've been trying to figure that out and find out, but it seems like quite a considered deal, and I'm wondering if it does predate, the formation of TKO. Conversations may have been happening in the background. I mean, I'd be surprised if this could, WWE has embraced virtually every platform there is. It has conversations with virtually every broadcaster around. I think they would be able to have those negotiations themselves. What I think with TKO, it's more the cross-platform, more being able to be bigger than the sum of its parts. There was speculation that that UFC and WWE's streaming rights could be sold together. That's obviously not happened with this, unless there is that UFC deal we don't know about further down the line. So yeah, I'm not really sure what the formation of TKO had on this, whether that changed the track in this. What I would say is, I think, to use a non-sporting analogy, if you're Bernie Ecclestone one, I think it was more like when Bob Geldof was putting Live Aid together, he was telling all the bands that everyone else agreed to play. So that might have been a clean way of putting it for a non-sporting audience. But yeah, I'm not sure on that.
So, Steve, do you think this deal is quite a risky play by Netflix? Do you feel like perhaps investing in sports is a more safer investment than perhaps some of the bets they make on original content? Or do you think there's a lot of risk behind it, investing such a significant amount of money into WWE?
I mean, $5 billion over 10 years sounds like a lot. It's not a lot really when you consider the costs of some of those prestige TV dramas. It's the same with Apple and MLS. That was about $2 billion, $2.5 billion for a similar period. And for companies with this much revenue, that's actually not a huge risk. It's it's a sizable outlay for Netflix, but it's not like it has to invest significant amounts in production, because WWE makes everything itself. So if it doesn't work, then obviously it's spent a lot of money on licensing. It might have had spent some money on its technological infrastructure, which it probably has to make anyway if it wants to do more kinds of entertainment. So it could be testing the water. Netflix, as we know, is a very data-driven business in terms of what it recommissions, what it tries to target. I think we've seen only recently we've got some insight into that data. It's been a very closely guarded secret by Netflix for many years, but now that it's opening up to advertisers, it needs to offer them some metrics. So yeah, I think it is a surefire way of increasing the audience. I don't think that's a controversial thing to say. In terms of getting those, if Raw pulls in 2 million, 3 million a week on a good week, yes, not everyone's going to make that jump, but a sizable part of that audience is internationally. Again, this is effectively the end for WWE Network. So you think about all those people who are actively subscribing to WWE Network, they're going to definitely continue to subscribe to Netflix, although you could argue quite a lot of them might already be subscribed to Netflix, but it's going to keep them subscribers. So yeah, I think it's not necessarily a risk-averse move, but I think you're right. It is definitely a way of getting that audience, and then perhaps it's comparable with other investments it's made.
Actually, just on that, Steve, we ran some numbers. Like I said, we did a few back of the envelope calculations. And from our consumer survey, we know that across the markets that they're going to launch in, 28% of WWE fans don't currently have Netflix. So that equates to about 1.9 million households, or $336 million a year. So if we're saying it's going to cost them $500 million a year, there is still a shortfall there, which is where those other monetization opportunities kind of come in. Now, that is assuming that it stays at the current ARPU levels. Obviously, if there are price increases, that goes up. But there is a tiny shortfall there because Netflix's penetration into WWE fans is so high in all these markets already.
So what's your thoughts, Minal? Ampere Analysis is clearly across a lot of the spend around original content and across entertainment. Do you guys think perhaps investing in live sports and events with such a defined audience base like sports has allows them to generate some efficiencies perhaps with their spend around original content?
Potentially. I think it depends on the sport content that they're going to end up with. So like with WWE at the moment, it does have a very hardcore loyal following, but it's not the biggest in the world. So if they manage to pull in more people from the casual side of it or from the lap side, like I used to watch WWF growing up so much. I haven't really watched it in the last decade or so. Will I watch it on Netflix? Yes. So if they can pull people like me in, then that is potentially an argument. But the proportion of their subscriber base who is interested in that high-end original content is going to be significantly bigger. So I think they're still going to be taking the punts with that. But you are right, it's a much higher risk strategy because you can end up spending a couple of billion on something and it just won't work and it won't land. Whereas with live sport, it's not just a guaranteed audience from the fan base, but you get so much more content around it because it's so much longer. So you get eyeballs for longer. And that's where ad revenues and things like that can come in to really bolster their revenues.
Well, one thing is for sure. The deal has got the whole industry excited and hopeful that Netflix has just begun a big shopping spree across live sports. And once again, we're here sitting talking about another major media rights deal being done with a US sports property and cashing in on media rights. Yet, whilst the rest of the market is finding it really tough to see the same sort of interest in other regions. So, ultimately, will Netflix continue spending? They say no, based on their latest earnings calls. Their CEO said as such. But I now will change my tune, I think, to expect another deal to come in the not so distant future. Who that is a whole other question, but let's see what develops over the next couple of months. Anyway, that's all we've got time for. A big thank you to you both, Steve and Minal, for joining us and for everyone tuning in.
Before you go, myself and Nick would just like to thank you for tuning into this episode of Stream Time. If you found the episode insightful, please make sure you like and subscribe on whichever platform you listen to. As a growing podcast, we'd greatly appreciate your support in sharing or writing a review. Ultimately, we want this podcast to not only entertain you, but also hopefully help you navigate the digital sports landscape. If you have any feedback on previous episodes or any topics and speakers you'd like to hear from in the future, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can find myself and Nick Meacham on LinkedIn or on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @SportsProChris1. Nick can be found @SportsProNick. Of course, if you want to stay fully up to date on the sports business news cycle, please make sure to visit the SportsPro Media website or sign up to one of our several newsletters to make sure you don't miss anything. Once again, thank you, and we look forward to you joining us next week on the Stream Time podcast.